The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. This is Marianne Thompson, President and Founder of Going Global. So happy to have a gazillion people at this webinar series this afternoon. We are so honored, Going Global, to be hosting yet another in our webinar series by hosted and with the experienced advice of our colleagues at the McCandlish Holton Law Firm. Good news, yes, this is being recorded. Lots of you have already written in to say, is this being recorded? Yes, it is. And earlier recordings can be found on the Going Global website that you're seeing, or platform that you have access to and you're seeing now. I hope at a later time you will join Going Global for one of our training sessions. Learn more about the Going Global resources. We provide information on 120 locations when it comes to H1B, OPT, etc. So over and beyond the U.S., we have information about that, 16 million jobs and internships. We have a whole roster of 6.5 million H1B visa application records of employers that have submitted those here in the United States. So what our immigration attorneys will share with you this afternoon can be more research at a deeper level, a complementary level with Going Global. So if you wondered where Taylor Swift has gone after her Aries tour, she is here. She is here on this presentation in the form of Crystal Malik. So Crystal Malik is a well-recognized immigration attorney with the immigration practice, as I said, of the McCandlish Holton Law Firm. She works with companies and universities throughout the United States, successfully processing thousands of work visas and green card applications each year. Crystal frequently collaborates with universities and council staff and students on the latest guidelines for successfully navigating the U.S. immigration process. Crystal has been highlighted as one of the best lawyers in America, one to watch. So the presentation will last about 45 minutes. It'll contain a lot of information. You're welcome to send us questions via chat. And at the end of the presentation, time allotting, we will answer whatever questions that we have time to answer. But again, it will be recorded. All of you who are attending the presentation this afternoon will get a communication from Going Global that contains the link. It'll take us until tomorrow to put all that together, but it will be coming your way. So with no further ado, Taylor Swift, Crystal Malik, the floor is yours.
Everybody, I'm Crystal Malik from McCandlish Holton. Cannot claim to be even a distant relative of Taylor Swift and will not sing on this webcast. We are missing our esteemed colleague, Mr. Rhodes, this afternoon. He'll be on our next presentation. Normally on these presentations, I'll answer questions while we're going, but since I'm going to be talking the whole time this time, we'll save that until the end. So we'll try to make sure that there's a good amount of sufficient time to do those questions at the end if you just want to put them in the chat. If you have questions about the presentation itself, those questions will be answered by our administrators here while we're doing the presentation. So what do we do here? Here at McCandlish Holton, we have a large group of immigration attorneys. We represent students and employers and universities across the country. As Marianne said, we process thousands of these applications, whether they're employment-based or family-based applications every year. And so what this presentation is going to do is I'm going to be trying to talk to you about the path of success for an international student who wants to get H1B status. H1B status is the most used type of work visa for college graduates. That's who we're talking here too, right? You F1 students who want to stay in the United States after you graduate. H1B is the specialty occupation visa, and that's why we're focusing on it. It's for college graduates, people who have a bachelor's degree in a specific specialty, and it's open to applicants of any country, right? So there are lots and lots of visas that are available that don't have work authorization, and a couple of visas that are available to nationals of specific countries for their work authorization. But H1B is the one that anybody from any country can apply for as long as they qualify under the requirements. So there's no specific country requirement. The other work visa types are limited that way. So that's why we're not focusing on those. We're focusing on our H1B today. So our typical path for an F1 student is F1 and optional practical training. You have 12 or 36 months per degree level. So let's say you're an F1 student getting your associate's degree, you're eligible for 12 months of OPT at the end of that associate's degree. If you move up to a bachelor's degree, you're eligible for another 12 months. If you move up to a master's degree, you're eligible for another 12 months. This is optional practical training where you're allowed to work for any employer in your degree specialty. If you happen to be a STEM graduate, that's science, technology, engineering, or math, you're eligible for an additional 24 months up to twice. So up to 2 degree levels can contain a STEM OPT extension. So that's why we say F1 with optional practical training, either 12 or 36 months per degree level. And then the majority of students who remain in the US then move to the H1B work visa, getting sponsorship from an employer. And then once they've gotten that H1B, they start to think about how they could remain here permanently if they would like to, and that's the green card. And the majority of people go for either an employment-based green card or a family-based green card. Today, we're gonna really be focusing on this H1B aspect, and that's because we're coming up to a very critical time in the H1B process at the very beginning, the first quarter of the year. So what this talk is going to do is try to prepare you to be able to discuss with a prospective employer what they would need to do to be able to sponsor you for H1B. The reason for this is that even though we have records of all sorts of employers who file these applications all the time and they know how to do it, a lot of smaller employers, a lot of employers you might want to be targeting, the type of companies you might want to work for, they may have never filed an H1B petition before. And they may need to have you kind of give them an idea of how they can proceed, to be able to kind of coach them, to give them a background on how they can proceed to help you stay in the US and continue to work for them. So the things that they're typically worried about are cost, timing, and obligations. Obligations because they know that they're going to have to be dealing with a government entity, or 2 or 3, depending on how much they sponsor you for. And so this talk is to kind of give you the ability to vocalize and address these concerns to your employer. So when we talk about optional practical training, we talked about you be an F1, you graduate, and you get 12 months of optional practical training. What you see on your screen is how you apply for that optional practical training. While you're doing this optional practical training, your employer doesn't have to do anything. They get to treat you exactly like any other employee because you will have your own social security number and you'll have an employment authorization document. So you can show up to work, fill out the I-9 form, which is the form that they're required to fill out to prove that you can work legally in the US, like any other employee. They don't have to pay for anything. They don't have to do anything. They just hire you and you get to show up on day 1 ready to work. When you apply for your optional practical training, your school's international student office is going to help you. They're going to walk you through all of the requirements that you see on the screen. Super, super important that you follow all of the rules that you see on your screen, or if you're applying 2 or 3 years from now, whatever the requirements are at that time. Your school's going to help you do that. They're going to proofread your application. They're going to give you in-services and everything to make sure that you meet these requirements. If you miss any one of the deadlines you see on your screen, unfortunately, the government's going to deny your optional practical training application and you won't get to take advantage of the work authorization. So my advice is stay in deep contact with your international student office to make sure you match all of these requirements, meet all of these requirements, and get that year of OPT so that you can continue on the road to getting your H1B and possibly a green card if that's what you want. The 24 months of STEM extension, you have to meet all the requirements that you see on your screen. At this step, again, the employer barely has to do anything. They don't have to pay for anything. They don't have to file anything. All they have to do is they have to be enrolled in a program called E-Verify, which is a voluntary program, no fee for that, where they promise that they're going to verify work authorization with a government entity, that E-Verify program online. They do have to sign off on a training plan, and they have reporting requirements to your school to make sure that they are supervising you and training you in your degree field. When you apply for this, you have to, again, meet all of the requirements on the screen. And even though you'll be in your second and third year after graduation, you're still going to depend fully on your International Student Office for this application. They're going to get your I-20 for you. They're going to help you with the application. They're going to make sure that everything qualifies. And you're going to report to them the entire time of that 2 years, where you're working, who you're working for, and how you meet the requirements for STEM OPT. Okay, so these requirements, again, very, very firm. If you miss any one of the deadlines that you see on the screen, you're going to get your application denied. So it's really, really important to work with your International Student Office and make sure you apply properly. All right, so we've gotten that year of work authorization, or that 3 years of work authorization, without the employer having any skin in the game, having to file anything or pay for anything. When we get to the H1B visa, this is where your employer has to take over. This is where they start being the ones to drive the process. When they go to the H1B visa, the employer has to sponsor you for this. They're going to have to pay for everything. They have to offer you a job that requires a degree. They have to pay a prevailing wage, and you have to have the degree that is required for the job. Okay? So at this point, they don't have to advertise for U.S. workers. They don't have to prove that they can't find U.S. workers. They just have to prove that they have a job that qualifies for H1B. So we're going to talk about two different kinds of H1B today. We're going to talk about the one that most people have to apply for. That's that CAP subject H1B. That's where you hear about the H1B lottery. All right. CAP subject is almost every single employer on the planet. We're going to talk about them. Second, we're going to talk about CAP exempt employers. Now, these are a very limited number of employers. It's specifically nonprofits that meet statutory and regulatory limitations. What you see on your screen at the bottom is what they have to meet, plus being a nonprofit. Just being a nonprofit doesn't make them CAP exempt. They also have to be either related to an institution of higher education. They have to have a relation. They have to be a non-governmental research organization, or they have to be an institution of higher education. So most employers, even nonprofits, are going to be subject to the H1B lottery. So we're going to spend a good amount of time talking about how to handle the H1B lottery, and then we'll talk about those of you who score jobs at CAP exempt institutions. All right, universal to the H1B is that you have 6 years of initial H1B work authorization eligibility. Anybody can get up to 6 years initially. Your employer is allowed to apply for these in 3-year increments. Some employers apply for less at a time. It doesn't take away your 6 years of eligibility. It just means that they have to apply for an extension faster. The scope of your H1B authorization, when an employer sponsors you for H1B and you are approved for H1B status, what happens is they apply with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and they're issued an approval notice on Form I-797. It's a green security paper. It says who your employer was. It says what dates you're allowed to be employed. And you're only allowed to work during the validity of that H1B for your H1B sponsor. You can't work for anybody else. You can't have self-employment. You can't drive Uber or Lyft. You have to work only for your H1B sponsor. Now, if you find a new job, you can change employers, but that new employer has to be willing to file an H1B petition for you as well. And they have this thing called H1B portability. So if your new employer files an H1B for you, you're allowed to start working as soon as that H1B is filed. You don't have to wait for an approval. And again, you get that total of 6 years maximum of H1B. And that's why we said we're going to spend just a tiny bit of time talking about the green card process, because you have to be able to have something that's after this H1B, but this H1B buys you 6 years to be able to figure that out. All right. Again, universal to your H1B. At this point, the employer drives everything. They are required to pay the attorney fee. They're required to pay the filing fees. All of the fees are what you see on your screens. The attorney fee is going to vary based on who they decide to hire. Some employers have internal attorneys who do all of their work, and so that's not a fee for them. They just employ the attorney who's going to do that. Some of them use outside counsel, and those fees vary anywhere in the usually around $3,000, give or take, for that attorney fee if they're using outside counsel. The base fees were updated April the 1st, and these fees are what the employers have to pay. If you're talking about nonprofits, then some of the fees are reduced for them. If you're talking for smaller companies, you can see that some of the fees are reduced for them as well. Optional premium processing, this is the only fee that you as the employee could possibly be allowed to pay. You're not allowed to pay any of the other fees that you see on the screen. They're not allowed to deduct them from your pay. They're not allowed to seek reimbursement from you. All of those would be violations. So it's really, really important to understand that at this point, the employer really is driving. The employer really is required to pay everything that's associated with this. The premium processing fee is if it's for your convenience and not for a business expense. So if we're talking about a business expense, we'd be talking about they need you on a certain day, and if they don't pay for premium processing, then they couldn't get you on that day. That's a scenario where they would need to pay the premium processing fee. If you need to take a vacation on a specific date and you want to be able to apply for a new visa while you're gone, and this $2,800 is for your convenience, then you're allowed to pay that fee, and they're not required to pay it. So it's just important to understand every year there are some scams where employers or fake employers advertise in newspapers or on Craigslist or wherever that they are offering H1B visas to people if those people pay. If you see that, it is a scam. You must run. Very, very important, because those can cause you a lot of problems in your future immigration processes. Super important to understand that these are all employer fees, and if you see something where somebody's asking you to pay, it's not lawful. Stay away from it. All right, so we said we're going to talk first about the H1B quota, the H1B lottery. It's also called the cap. So we're going to first talk about the majority of employers who are subject to the H1B lottery. Now, the H1B lottery runs every fiscal year. The government's fiscal year runs from October 1 to September 30th. Here we are in December. There are no H1Bs left for fiscal year 2025. They have been gone since March. Nobody has been allowed to apply for these visas since March, because they allow employers to file 6 months ahead of time, and they run a lottery for the ability to file H1B petitions. This is because there are 85,000 new H1Bs available each year in the lottery, 20,000 for US advanced degree applicants and 65,000 for bachelor's degree or higher. Those 85,000 slots, they have more than 400,000 applicants for those 85,000 slots every year. And so what happens is they have to run a lottery in order to choose who's going to be eligible for those 85,000 slots. They do that to try to be as fair as possible, and to not have a more discriminatory system. Now, this is the way the system runs right now. There have been proposals in the prior Trump White House where they wanted to change this to where they would get to subjectively determine who the applicants were that were selected based on pay range or type of degree. Those ideas were not able to be executed during the last Trump administration. It's possible that could change near the end of his administration, but it would be very difficult for them to change it. We suspect that it will stay this way, and so that's what we're going to talk about today. All right, so we're going to do this on kind of a continuum. When we're talking about graduation, we're going to kind of pretend that we're talking about people who are graduating in May, and then we'll talk about some December graduation. Right, so you have on your continuum an October 1 start is your gray, right? And March 6 through 22 is when employers are allowed to enter their employees into the H1B lottery. Now, the specific dates change every year. They change by just a little, but it's usually that second to the third week of March. So you know that it's going to be in the middle dates of March that you're going to have to get your employer to look at this each year that you want to be entered. And they're applying for a start date of October 1. The employer can never get a start date that's before October 1 during this H1B lottery. If they're having to apply for you the very first time ever, they're going to be applying for an October 1 start date. So let's pretend that you're graduating in May and you've been working for an employer in an internship all throughout your experience, your bachelor's degree experience, and that employer wants to hire you even though you haven't started working for them full time yet. They can do that. They can apply for you even before you've graduated because they know that you're going to graduate in May. So they can enter you in March. And if you're selected, the notification will come out April 1st. Typically, they actually release it in the days right before April 1st. And so what you'll do is they enter you March 6th through 2022, March through 22, and then by April 1st, they've been notified that you've been selected, and then they have 90 days to file your application, to file your petition with USCIS. As long as you actually do graduate in May, that's allowed, okay? Now, think of a second scenario. Let's say that you don't have somebody who wants to sponsor you before you graduate, but you're graduating in May and you're going to set your OPT for June the following year, and you only have 1 year of optional practical training. So what you're going to do is you're going to start working for an employer and you're going to work your hardest and you're going to determine whether or not that's an employer that you'd like to sponsor you in the H1B lottery. And about December, January is where you're going to want to be talking to that employer so that you can determine whether or not they can sponsor you for that H1B lottery. You're going to want to broach the topic a little bit early to give them time to figure out how to do that, because they may need to hire an attorney. They may need to get approval from another department. What's going to happen then is that when you start talking to them about it, they'll set everything up. They'll apply in March. They'll be notified in April, and you'll be able to request that October 1 start date. Now, we're talking about OPT. OPT is only June to June. So what happens is that they have something called H1B gap relief. So if your employer enters you in the lottery and you have OPT and you're selected and your employer files the petition, then your CVIS record, which is your I-20, which is your F1 status, will update your OPT to cover you through September the 30th to get you to that October 1 start date on your H1B. Now, we were talking about that if they enter you in the lottery before you graduate, they can enter you in whichever degree level you're getting ready to graduate in. So if you're getting ready to graduate in a master's, they can enter you in the advanced degree quota. If you're getting ready to graduate with an undergraduate degree, they can enter you in the undergraduate degree quota. Now, why is it important which quota that they put you into? It's because of this distinguishment on the different types of applicants. People who have a US advanced degree get kind of 2 bites of the apple. What happens when you enter in this lottery is your employer puts information in about your passport, your name, your date of birth, and which quota you're being entered in. When they have all of the applicants together, the first thing they do is they pull out all of the people who have US master's degree or higher. They select what they hope will be enough to yield 20,000 actual visa petitions being submitted. And then they take all of those people who were not selected in the first round where they selected just the advanced degree applicants, and they put them back into the pool so that they can be in that all degrees selection. So they get to be uniquely available for 20,000, and then they also get to be in the selection for the 65,000. So that's why it's beneficial if you're getting ready to graduate with a master's degree that your employer be able to enter you even right before your graduation in the advanced degree quota. Now, so we've talked about this is what we've been talking about is the lottery selection process for H1B employers who are not CAP exempt. We're talking about almost every employer is going to be subject to that lottery system. All for-profit companies are subject to the lottery, and most nonprofits are subject to the lottery. The second kind of H-1B employer we have is our cap exempt institutions. Now, what does that mean? That means that they don't have to worry about the lottery. They can apply for your H-1B anytime during the year. They're not limited on number. They don't have to worry about you getting selected. They know that they can just direct file a petition with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and it's going to be adjudicated under the requirements. So it has the same requirements. The employer is still required to file it. The employer is still required to pay it. They're not required to recruit, but they do have to have a job that requires a bachelor's degree in a specific specialty. You have to have that specialty degree. They have to be willing to pay the prevailing wage, and they have to file. Organizations are going to be 501c3 organizations. They're going to be universities. They're going to be nonprofits that are related to universities, and they're going to be nonprofit governmental or non-governmental research organizations. The way that you can find out if a company is a nonprofit is the IRS has a tool where you can go in and you can look up nonprofit organizations. Universities won't always be there, but we know that almost all universities are nonprofits. If it's a for-profit university, you're going to be able to figure that out pretty easily. It'll be one of those non-state institutions and the for-profit, very specific for-profit entities. Universities are well aware of the cap exemption, and they know that they can use it for every single type of employee that they have. The place where you might have to educate someone, educate an employer, where you might be able to show them a resource they didn't know existed for them, are these other nonprofit organizations, the ones that are affiliated with universities or these research organizations. Every year we have at least a handful of employers who learn for the very first time that they have this ability to file these petitions. When you're thinking about the nonprofit organizations that are related to universities, you'd be very surprised how many of these employers there are. Think about all of the public schools who have affiliation agreements with universities to host student teachers or to host dual enrollment with their high school students. Think about all of the hospitals that are affiliated with universities or medical schools. Think about the social service and social work organizations that are affiliated with universities. And it's not just professors or physicians that these entities can sponsor, it's every type of employee that these organizations are required to have. Social workers, teachers, IT professionals, social media workers, just all the different types of, when we talk about research organizations, a lot of these have engineers and different types of scientific researchers that are required for these positions, and they sponsor all of these employees for H1B without having to worry about the lottery. They just have to prove either the affiliation and the nonprofit, and they have to prove that the employment qualifies. So super important that you understand how to kind of research this, which type of entity is going to qualify, and then how to look up the employer and how to engage with them during the interview process to figure out if maybe they have these relationships that they don't even know about. Okay, so we've talked about our H1B cap subject employers, which is the majority of employers. It's all for-profit employers, and it's nonprofits who don't meet the requirements that you see on your screen. And then we've talked about employers who are exempt from the H1B lottery, who can file these petitions at any time, which meet the requirements that you see on your screen. Our next slide is alternatives to the H1B. So maybe you weren't able to find a cap exempt employer, or maybe your employer entered you in the H1B lottery and you weren't selected. If you are from Canada or Mexico, there's a special visa that you could be eligible for called the TN visa. And it's through the old NAFTA that got updated during the last Trump administration. What it is they have a list of different types of employment where citizens of those two countries can get TN visas to come and work in the United States temporarily. If you're from Chile or Singapore, there's a visa called the H1B one that's super similar to the H1B, same specialty occupation requirement. And for citizens of Australia, you have a visa called the E3 that's available to you. The issue here is that you have to hold a passport of one of these countries. That's why we don't spend as much time on them, because it's so super limited between the countries. And with with Canada and Mexico, the TN visa is limited not just to specialty occupation, but by profession, by a specific profession. All right. L1, manager, executive, or specialized knowledge. That's not usually for students, because what happens here is that you have to have worked overseas for a multinational organization for a year before you're able to transfer into the US to work for a US entity. Some people do their e-trader and investor. So if you're a business school graduate and you want to invest in your own company and your country is a member of this e-treaty, this is not going to work for anybody from China or India because they're not signatories, but you can look on the USCIS website and see if your country is a member of the treaty, and you could actually decide that you want to start your own company and work under this e-treaty investor visa. Some people re-enroll for full-time study. So the reason for this is that sometimes people have only gotten a bachelor's degree. They've only been allowed to apply for their H1B one time during OPT, and they still weren't selected. So sometimes they do this to get a master's degree so that they'll have a better shot. Some people go back to get a STEM degree so that they'll have a 3-year optional practical training. And some people re-enroll so that they can use what's called curricular practical training, which would allow them to do internships and work for an employer while they're an F1 student. So it's super important to understand that H1B is going to be our most used visa, but there are some alternatives for people who are not selected in that very first year. Now, I do want to very quickly, before we move to questions, I want to talk about some limitations on this H1B lottery. All right, so every single time that I do this talk, I get questions about trying to game this system. There's not a way to game this system. You should not aim to game this system, because what happens is every year after the lottery, they investigate the entries and they figure out if companies entered a person more than once for what they don't feel is a bona fide job opportunity. So the security features of the H1B lottery system are that the employers are required to only enter a person one time and only for each individual bona fide job opportunity. They police this by looking at the name, the passport number, and the date of birth of the applicant. So let's say that you have more than one passport and you have more than one employer that you want to enter you into the lottery. Really important that each of the employers use the exact same passport and the exact same passport number. Because if the government thinks that you, as the applicant, are trying to get more than one entry, they can revoke an H1B that you were granted during the lottery. The way that we see this happen is that they actually pull all of the people who've been approved for H1B. They compare everything down to the email address of the person entering you, and even the routing of the computer that put in the entry. We've seen people get revocations a year or two after they've been approved for H1B based on an employer claiming to be two employers entering them more than once, or applicants whose information was put just a little bit differently so that they got two entries. Because what the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services started doing last year was taking all of the entries for a single person and making them one single entry. And then that way, even if 3 employers entered you into the lottery, you only got one bite at the apple. You only got one shot. All of the employers could petition for you, but you were only one single entry. So your personal information on every single entry that's put in for you personally needs to be with your same name spelled the same way, your same date of birth, and the passport number should match. So make sure that if you have more than one employer entering you, you're providing the same information to all of the employers. All right, so that concludes my presentation. So I know that Marianne, I think you had some questions to get us started.
Crystal, this is going to blindside you because this is not a topic we discussed, but you know, one of the things that I always counsel international students is you cannot put all your eggs into the H1B basket. There's not enough to go around. You just cannot limit or have tunnel vision to only applying for an H1B. You might have to consider going back to your home country. You might have to consider alternative degrees, going to another country. But Crystal, what I'm really interested in is one of these alternatives you spoke about. and that's an L1 manager. And if I understand it, you can go overseas for 1 year. I'm going to insert my own commentary, easiest to go back to your home country. So go overseas for 1 year, work for an American organization. I'm putting words in your mouth, and lateral back into the United States. So that's a 1 year, and we've got a wonderful employer directory in Going Global that lists 450,000 employers around the world. So say you did an OPT with KPMG, go back to Delhi, work for KPMG, on an L1, Crystal, is that what I understand, for 1 year? And then can you come back to the United States? And once you leave the country, work overseas for a year, what type of visa is required to come back to the United States if you've taken that step? Or is there no visas? It's an automatic visa approval. Can you talk a little more about this L1?
Yeah, no, it's a lot more limited than that. Everything in immigration law is kind of more limited than that, right? So with an L visa, it's like you said, working for a multinational organization. It could be something like a KPMG that has offices all over the world. KPMG does that, Allianz does that, like lots and lots and lots of multinational organizations do it. The issue is that after you've worked for that multinational outside the US, they have to classify you for the L visa, right? If you're going back to your home country, you're not going to need a visa to go back there. You'll just work for them in your home country as a citizen of that country. They might send you to a different country, a country you weren't from, and you would need whatever visa that you have to work in that country. When you come back, what you would be applying for is called an L1 visa, but you have to classify as either a multinational manager or executive, or you have to be classified as a specialized knowledge individual. So they use this most often for the multinational managers or executives. So people that are like the CEOs and COOs and are managing different components of the organization. The specialized knowledge individual is a lower guy on the totem pole, but it's very, very limited because it has to be somebody who has such highly specialized knowledge about the company and their processes and procedures that they couldn't easily train a US citizen to do the job. So it can't be something like you wouldn't be able to do that as a finance analyst, right? Unless there was some kind of proprietary technology that you specifically knew how to use that they couldn't train a US worker in using. So it's an alternative, but it's not as multi-use as the H1B is, because an H1B can be anybody who has that specialized bachelor's degree and qualifies.
Got it. So Crystal, yeah, that was my question. You've got lots of questions on your end. Have at it.
All right, let's see what we can find in our questions here. And Britt, if you see any that look really, really good from the top, then let me know. I'm gonna try to catch these answers. Okay, so I'm in F1 and I applied for a STEM extension as a PhD postdoc. At the same time, I'm about to start an EB2 NIW. When they say EB2 NIW, they're talking about a national interest waiver I-140, which is an immigrant petition where you're trying to get your green card. I'm also gonna try to get a CAP exempt H1B. Do I need to inform my UVA lawyer? Okay, so I think that it's super important for me on this particular question to say email me because we're probably involved in this in some way, and to make sure that you do keep your UVA person, your employer, advised as to what you're doing. So the question really boils down to you do want your employer to know if you're filing self petitions for green card status. Because it could impact how and when they file your applications. It's also super important that if you're doing this while you're an OPT and all of that, that you're talking to an immigration attorney about how to maintain your F1 status while you're doing that. Because sometimes immigrant petitions can get in the way of travel, or they can get in the way of just goals that you have in the immigration world. Can you ever only have one H1B in your entire life? For example, if I get an H1B, could I either get another one after that? What if I left the US and wanted to return? So you can have more than one H1B. You could have a CAP subject employer who applies for you, and then a cap exempt employer wants to hire you and they switch you over to that H1B. You could have you could have one job in H1B status and you get a new employer who wants to offer you more money, and so they port your H1B over to them. They file a new H1B petition and port that to the new employer. If you do a green card process with your employer, they can actually extend your H1B beyond the normal 6 years if they've started the green card process for you. That's why the green card process, we're not talking about that today, but it's a super important part of your process because it helps you to get more than 6 years of eligibility. In the event that you decide that you don't want to be in H1B status anymore, you don't want a green card, and you leave the US, your H1B could, if you have any of your 6 years left, you could come back in H1B with a new employer and use the rest of your 6 years. If you stay outside the US for a year, you could start a new 6 years of H1B eligibility, but there's a difficulty, right? If you wanted to start a new 6 years of H1B eligibility, you'd have to qualify for the lottery again, if you're working for a cap subject employer. So what most people do is they just grab the rest of whatever they had of the 6 years of H1B eligibility, and they restart H1B and figure out how to get a green card a little bit faster. Can a person get H1B from a nonprofit employer directly if they have the job offer without applying for OPT? Do not do that to yourself. The reason that, even though we're talking about H1B today, I spent a lot of time on OPT is because you can never guarantee that you're going to keep H1B, and you can never guarantee that you're going to get selected, and you can never guarantee that you're not going to get laid off. Every single year people get selected for H1B, and then their H1B gets terminated because of a layoff or some other problem that happens with the employment. Always take all of the options you have. So when you graduate, you're eligible for 1 or 3 years of OPT. Apply for that OPT, even if you have an employer who wants to sponsor you for H1B. Now, some employers want you to go directly to H1B. I don't know why they would want to do that, because they get free 1 or 3 years of EAD employment. So if you're talking about a cap exempt employer who wants to get you straight to H1B, the only way that I would say to forego the OPT is if they are immediately applying for your green card at the same time. Because remember that you only get 6 years of H1B eligibility. And so you want to have that extra 1 or 3 years of work authorization on top of that H1B. So we have a lot of cap exempt employers that we do work for, and I used to set their H1B up to go the day after their OPT. So they had that extra year that they got to use on top of their 6 years of eligibility. Again, talk to an attorney about your specific situation to see if it really merits going ahead with the H1B. There are some universities that are cap exempt where STEM OPT doesn't really work because they're not doing a training plan for you. And in that case, you need to go straight to H1B. But definitely talk to someone who knows your specific situation before you make the final decision. If an F1 student, okay, we're talking about the timeline here for H1B. So if an F1 student is graduating May of 2025 and the employer wins the H1B lottery, you said they have to file within 90 days. This person said 9, but it's 90 days of April 1st. What if the F1 student does not have the degree or final transcript diploma by the because the graduation date is mid-late June? So you're going to wait until the degree is conferred. You're not going to apply until the degree is conferred. So that may have been a confusion about the 9 versus 90 days. So they have 90 days to apply for the H1B. And so most degrees are going to be conferred by that May 15. So you'll wait until the conferral to file. What we've done in the past, if you don't have the actual degree copy yet or the final transcript, is we can actually file with a registrar letter that says the degree was conferred. And then they may issue an RFE, but in most cases, the registrar letter is enough. Again, your attorney will really talk to you about your specific situation. If 2 employees from 2 different job entities applied for H1B visa, would that be 1 approval if approved and you get to work on the H1B visa? So I think I'm not positive, but I think what we're talking about here is concurrent H-1B employment. So you can actually have two H-1Bs at one time. So if you had two different firms that wanted to hire you, and here they say specifically an architectural firm and a university, that can work. You can actually work for a CAP subject employer if you are at the same time working for a CAP exempt employer, and you can do that without winning the lottery. The issue is that the employment is dependent on the CAP exempt entity. So as soon as the work with the CAP exempt entity ends, the work with the CAP subject entity, the one that would have had to have filed a lottery petition otherwise, would have to end as well. So you can have two H-1B approvals as long as both of them file an H-1B for you, and both of them you have an approval notice for both, where it has the name and the dates that you're allowed to work for those employers. I'm going to be an MBA graduate with STEM OPT. I'm going to graduate in May and start with an employer in June. My employer hasn't been very open or knowledgeable about applying in March. What are the ways that I could persuade or convince them to file? I think the best argument is reminding them that there are 3 or 4 or 5 times as many applicants as there are slots. And so we advise the employers that we work with to apply for every year that you're eligible, because there are situations where somebody never gets selected in the lottery, even if they have 3 years of getting chosen. So what we say is the more times that they enter you, the more likely they are to get to keep you. So the argument I would use is it's very cheap to enter somebody in the H-1B lottery. It's a $10 filing fee to enter them into the lottery. They only have to pay for a full petition if you're selected. And if you're selected, that means that they know they're going to get to keep you for at least 6 years. But if they only apply for you the last year, then you'll only have one chance to get selected. And just statistically, that's not a great chance. So if they like your work, and if they want you to be able to work there for that full 6 years, that low barrier to entry, that $10, and the statistical probabilities really should convince them. At what point does a labor certification come into play? That's during the green card process. We will have a green card process presentation in the new year. So definitely come to that. That's the way. Doing a labor certification is a way that they can start a green card process for you, and a way that you become eligible to extend your H-1B beyond 6 years. All right, I've got a lot more questions here. Let's see. Is it not necessary to prove that there are no American citizens available to fill the position? That is a labor certification green card requirement, not an H-1B requirement. For the H-1B, they just have to prove that they want to hire you and that the position and you qualify for H-1B. When they want to apply for the green card, that labor certification, again, what we were talking about just a second ago, that's when they have to prove that they can't workers who are qualified for the position. Again, that's going to be, I think it's February that we're going to be doing that presentation. So definitely sign up for that February presentation. My employer is not ready to sponsor, but can I apply on my own? So H-1B, again, driven by the employer. You have to have an employer sponsor. So use your OPT wisely to find an employer who is willing to sponsor, because it's a situation where you are dependent on that employer. And if you've really already figured out that they're not going to sponsor, then it's time to start looking, because there are a lot of employers who are willing to sponsor. Do you provide a free consultation? What are your consultation fees? So as somebody who has attended this session today, we put our contact information on the screen, and you can send us emails with questions, with your questions. We can answer most questions by email for free. If you needed an immigration process or something, there would be fees for that kind of thing. We also talk to employers and universities and all of that for free. So if you are, if you have these types of questions, definitely use the contact information that you see on the screen. How can I start a small business? What are the requirements like entrepreneurship? So we talked about that e-visa. That's what you're going to want to look up. So when you're looking up e-visas or any other kind of visa, always make sure you're on a .gov website. Tons and tons and tons of great information there directly from the Immigration Service. And if you are from one of the countries that allows you to do that e-visa, contact us. Mark loves doing these business E2 visas for treaty people from treaty countries. Can you please share more information about the Trump administration to tighten the H1B section to certain pay range or positions? So I'm not going to spend very much time on this because it's the Trump administration and you have no idea what in the world they're going to do or whether or not they're going to do it in a constitutional way. They've had ideas that they should limit H1B to specific pay grades. If they do that, they're going to get sued. They only have a 4-year administration because he's already been a president in a prior administration. He's not eligible for re-election. He's only got 4 years to completely change and overhaul these things. And H1B is not to be top. He would have to do a full out regulation, which means he has to publish in the Federal Register and he has to get notice and comment. And as soon as it tries to get implemented, that's when people are going to sue, because any regulation that limits it in that way is going to be contrary to the statute. So I'm not going to spend very much time on that, but understand that he does want to target it in some ways, but it's going to be really hard for him to do. If you're close to graduating, probably not going to impact you. The way that it'll impact you the most is that he issues, during his administration, he encourages the Immigration Service to issue a lot of requests for evidence. We spent a lot of time pre-screening cases for these requests for evidence, and we still had a pretty good success rate, a really good success rate during the Trump administration because we were filing for cases that did qualify, right? So as long as we know that you qualify from the front side, even if we get a request for evidence, you don't have to panic. But understand that it does take longer during the Trump administration, and you can expect more barriers like requests for evidence where you have to provide really minute detail on the job, the duties, and how you qualify. That was the biggest change to H1B during the last Trump administration, and I suspect that that's going to be the biggest major change during this iteration of the Trump administration as well. When an individual switches employers and has submitted their information for this change, is there a time limit or time frame they need to stay within for documenting the change of employer appropriately? So you have to have a new H1B petition filed before you can start working for the new employer. So the first time you get H1B, you have to have actual approval notice. When you're switching employers, you get to have just the receipt notice, but you have to have proof that your package was delivered to USCIS before you can start. So the date that it's filed, you can start working for the new employer. Question on fees. We do flat fees. Our office does flat fees for the majority of case types. Every attorney is different though. Some attorneys charge hourly fees. Question about whether or not an H4 visa holder would be able to work. An H4 is the dependent of an H1B holder, and they are only allowed to work if the H1B holder has a green card process started for them. H4 work authorization is a target of the Trump administration, so stay tuned on that one. I'm currently working for a company as an intern until March, which can potentially be converted to full-time employee after the internship ends. If the company agrees to pre-register for the H1B lottery in the system, do I need to have a full-time offer from this employer at the time of the pre-registration? H1B signifies that you have an October 1 offer. So you would want to know that they were going to hire you for that October 1 start date. All right, so we're basically out of time, and I really apologize I wasn't able to get to every single question, but I do want for you guys to take note of the information on the screen, which is our contact information, and definitely contact us if you have more questions that I was not able to answer during the presentation today. Marianne?
Crystal, you are a rock star. So, you know, we need to come up with a you. You're our equivalent Wigger Swifty. So thank you so much for all the knowledge you shared today. I do want to remind everyone, as Crystal said, she and her colleague, Mark Rhodes, who was not able to join us today, are available to you on a complimentary basis for any initial questions you might have about H1Bs, OPTs, green cards. You can contact them preferably by email. They're not only rock stars, they're saints. They give you their cell number as well. So feel free to reach out to Mark and Crystal. As Crystal mentioned, we will have a dedicated presentation on February 12th, all about green cards. So if that's a topic of interest to you, we will have registration up for that shortly if we don't already. Again, this presentation has been recorded, and you will get a link to that, and it will live on the Going Global platform. So feel free to go back and listen again to just the great wisdom imparted by Crystal today. She is our Christmas come early to you. So lots of great information today. Want to remind you again, Going Global has a listing going back to 2009 of H1B visa application employers, 6.5 million records of employers here in the United States who have either recently or in prior years submitted H1B visa applications. It's the same old list of employers year after year after year. We've done a lot of your homework for you. Crystal has, we have. We also have a very significant section on OPT, including a listing of 500 American employers who are known to be OPT friendly. These are American employers who have a track record of hiring OPT applicants, along with direct links to current opportunities with their companies. So tens of thousands of opportunities, my friends, all here for you to just pick up on your initiative and explore. Lastly, again, please join us for a Going Global training session. They're offered a dozen times a month. Going Global has a lot of information that is compatible, complementary, and beyond what Crystal has shared with you today. So on behalf of Crystal, Mark in absentia, and the 50 members of the Going Global team, happy holidays, happy job hunting. Signing off, wishing all of you the best in your personal career exploration. Thank you. Goodbye.